The Art Director's Debrief, Special Investigation, Part 5. The 200-year trial of a banned masterpiece, the final verdict. Hello, and welcome back to the Emotive Archive. We have journeyed through the vibrant and hypocritical world of 18th century London. We have followed the rise of Fanny Hill, from victim to virtuoso, and we have deconstructed the novel's revolutionary form and its rebellious philosophy. In this, our grand finale, we will trace the story of the book itself after its creation. This is the story of its legacy, a dramatic and often brutal 200-year-long trial that saw this novel hunted, burned, and prosecuted across the globe. We will analyze its initial condemnation, its long life in the literary underworld, the fierce legal battles that sought to destroy it, and its ultimate triumphant vindication. This is the story of how a dirty book became a champion for the freedom of speech. Let us begin with the initial crime and punishment, the moment the state declared war on a work of art. As we discussed, John Cleland's novel, published in 1748, was an immediate underground sensation, but its popularity was a double-edged sword. In November 1749, the full force of the British establishment came down upon it. Both Cleland and his publisher were arrested and brought before the Secretary of State on charges of corrupting the king's subjects. This was a serious charge, a form of seditious libel. The trial, however, was not a public one. It was a political maneuver. Cleland, a man with powerful friends and a respectable background, was not the state's true target. He was a pawn in a larger game, a public example in the ongoing moral panic against vice and libertinism. Faced with the prospect of a lengthy, ruinous imprisonment, Cleland did what many have done in his position. He disavowed his own creation. He publicly declared his contrition and promised to never again offend the public morality. In return, the charges were effectively dropped, and he was even granted a small pension, a form of hush money, to ensure his future compliance. The author was saved, but the book was condemned. It was now officially an outlaw, a literary fugitive. This official condemnation began the second phase of the book's life, its long, thriving existence in the literary underworld. For the next 200 years, Fanny Hill lived a life in the shadows. It was constantly reprinted in pirated underground editions, both in England and across the world. This is a fascinating aspect of its history. The very act of banning the book made it more desirable. It became a byword for forbidden knowledge, a secret text to be hidden, smuggled, and read by candlelight. However, this underground life came at a cost to the novel's artistic integrity. These pirated editions were often crude, poorly printed, and most damagingly, they were often illustrated. The original 1748 edition had no illustrations, allowing Cleland's euphemistic literary language to do the work. But the pirated versions were filled with crude, explicit, and often anatomically incorrect engravings that stripped the novel of its wit and turned it into simple graphic pornography. The book's reputation was thus shaped not by its original artistic form, but by these illicit, vulgar copies. It was known not for its cleverness, but for its crudeness. This was the version of Fanny Hill that the world knew for 2 centuries. The 19th century, with the rise of Victorian morality, saw the war against Fanny Hill escalate. This was the era of the great social purity campaigns, a time when any discussion of sexuality was driven deep underground. In England, the Obscene Publications Act of 1857 gave the state sweeping new powers to seize and destroy any material deemed obscene. In the United States, the most formidable enemy of the novel emerged in the form of one man, Anthony Comstock, a fanatical moral crusader. Comstock was the founder of the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice and the architect of the infamous Comstock Act of 1873. This federal law made it illegal to send any obscene, lewd, or lascivious material through the mail. Comstock, armed with this law, became the nation's postmaster of morality. He boasted of having destroyed 15 tons of obscene books, and Fanny Hill was at the top of his hit list. Throughout the Victorian era and into the early 20th century, the book was relentlessly hunted. Copies were seized from bookstores, travelers' luggage was searched, and anyone caught selling it faced hefty fines and imprisonment. The state's war on this one single novel had become a global, multi-generational crusade. The tide began to turn in the 20th century. With the rise of modernism and a new, more open attitude towards sexuality, the battleground shifted from the streets to the courtrooms. The most famous and important legal battles over Fanny Hill took place in the United States in the 1960s, a decade of profound social and sexual revolution. The key case was Memoirs versus Massachusetts, which reached the Supreme Court in 1966. For the first time, the novel was not just being prosecuted, it was being defended by prominent literary critics and academics. The central question of this historic trial was no longer just, is this book obscene, but is this book a work of art? The defense's argument was a brilliant one. They argued that for a work to be deemed obscene, it had to be proven to be utterly without redeeming social value. They then presented a powerful case that Fanny Hill, despite its explicit content, was a work of significant literary, historical, and social importance. They analyzed its sophisticated language, its satirical critique of society, and its groundbreaking first-person narrative. They argued that it was not just a dirty book, but a valuable historical document and a work of literary merit. The Supreme Court, in a landmark 6-3 decision, agreed. The final verdict was that Fanny Hill was not obscene. This was a monumental victory. After 217 years of living as a literary outlaw, the novel was finally, officially vindicated. The decision was a turning point in the history of censorship and the fight for freedom of speech. It established a new legal precedent, affirming that works of art, even those that deal with explicit sexual themes, are protected under the First Amendment. The trial of Fanny Hill was over. The book had won. Its vindication paved the way for the legal publication of other controversial masterpieces, from D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover to Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. The little book, written in a debtor's prison, had become a giant in the battle for artistic freedom. This brings us to the final aspect of our analysis, the legacy and modern meaning of Fanny Hill. What is its role in our world today? It is no longer a forbidden underground text. It is now a part of the literary canon, studied in universities, and available in respectable paperback editions. Its victory in the courts was a crucial battle in the ongoing war for freedom of expression, a war that continues to this day with debates over banned books in schools and libraries. The novel stands as a powerful testament to the idea that censorship is often more about the anxieties of the censor than the content of the work itself. But its most enduring legacy, I believe, is its voice. The voice of Fanny Hill, the intelligent, humorous, and unapologetic woman of pleasure, was a revolutionary act in 1748, and in many ways it remains so today. It is a powerful reminder of the importance of giving a voice to the voiceless, of exploring the lives of those who have been marginalized and silenced by society. It is a celebration of female agency, of economic independence, and of the radical, unapologetic pursuit of happiness. It is a work that, for all its scandal, is ultimately a profoundly optimistic and humanistic one. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of a good story well told. Now that we have analyzed the epic 200-year-long trial of Fanny Hill, let us, for our final thesis, propose a more radical and surprising interpretation of its legacy. We have seen how the book fought against the law, but what if the book itself is a profound commentary on the law? I will now argue that Fanny Hill is not just a story about sex. It is a brilliant and deeply cynical legal and economic allegory. It is a novel that, under the guise of an erotic memoir, deconstructs the very nature of contracts, property, and the law in a burgeoning capitalist society. Fanny Hill is not just a courtesan, she is a lawyer, and her body is her courtroom. Let us first re-examine the world of 18th century London. This was not just an age of enlightenment, it was the age of the contract. The rising bourgeois class, with its focus on trade, property, and finance, was obsessed with the idea of the legally binding agreement. Marriage was the ultimate contract, a transfer of property from a father to a husband. Business deals were codified in ink. The law was seen as the great rational force that could impose order on the chaos of human interaction. The novel, as an art form, was itself a kind of contract between the author and the reader, a promise of a coherent and morally satisfying narrative. Fanny Hill takes this world obsessed with contracts and subverts it from the inside out. Fanny's entire career can be read as a series of complex, often unwritten contracts. Her initial encounter with Mrs. Brown is a fraudulent contract. She is promised the position as a maid, but is instead tricked into sexual servitude. Her time in the brothel is a series of short-term contracts where her services are exchanged for a fee. Her relationship with her first lover, Charles, is a romantic contract based on love and mutual affection, which is brutally broken by his father, a representative of the patriarchal legal order. Her time as a kept mistress to a wealthy man is a long-term, exclusive contract, providing her with security in exchange for her fidelity. And her final status as a high-class, independent courtesan is that of a freelance contractor, a woman who now has the power to negotiate and set the terms of her own agreements. Through this lens, the novel becomes a fascinating study in the economics of desire. Fanny learns that in her world, everything has a price. Love, pleasure, security, and even virtue are commodities to be bought, sold, and negotiated. Her body is her capital, her primary asset, and she learns to manage it with the skill of a master investor. She is not just a woman of pleasure, she is a woman of business. Her memoirs are not just a confession, they are a ledger, a detailed accounting of her transactions, her profits, and her losses. This is a deeply cynical, but also a deeply realistic view of her society. It is a world where the romantic ideals of love and honor are constantly being undermined by the cold, hard logic of the market. Furthermore, let us analyze the novel's language, the art of the euphemism, as a form of legal and philosophical argument. The law, like science, seeks to classify and define the world with a precise, objective language. Cleland takes this principle and applies it to the one area the law and polite society refuse to name: sex. His elaborate, almost Baroque metaphors for genitalia and sexual acts are a form of mock legal and mock scientific terminology. He is creating a new language, a new lexicon of pleasure, to describe a world that had been left in the shadows. This is a profoundly intellectual game. He is using the very tools of the Enlightenment, reason, classification, and sophisticated language, to explore its greatest taboo. He is demonstrating that anything, even the most debased of human activities, can be elevated to a subject of serious, artistic, and philosophical inquiry if it is described with the right language. This brings us to the final, brilliant irony of the novel's 200-year trial. The book was condemned for being obscene, for violating the moral laws of society. But the book itself is, in many ways, obsessed with the idea of law and contracts. The final victory of Fanny Hill in the Supreme Court in 1966 was a legal triumph. The court had to engage in a form of literary criticism to analyze the book's redeeming social value. The judges, in essence, were forced to play Cleland's game. They had to treat this dirty book as a serious work of literature, to analyze its form, its language, and its ideas. The final verdict, that the book was not obscene, was a confirmation of the novel's central radical argument, that the value of a thing, whether it is a woman or a work of art, should not be determined by a rigid, preconceived moral code, but by an open-minded and intelligent examination of its own unique qualities. The book, in the end, created the very legal and intellectual framework by which it would eventually be vindicated. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, a literary time bomb that took 200 years to finally explode, and in doing so, to expand the very definition of literature itself. Thank you for joining me in the Emotive Archive.